Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
People don't notice the silent ones. The ones who move through the world without fanfare, anchoring the chaos with steady resolve. That was me, Marcus Ainsley. Every evening, I slipped into my scrubs as if donning armor, zipped the pockets of my blood-orange jacket against the sharp Boston wind, and headed into the humming belly of Cambridge General. There, amid the fluorescent light and the steady beep of monitors, I became a night operations nurse, the quiet guardian at the hospital's pulse point when the rest of the city slumbered. Most folks picture nurses bustling around, urgent voices raised, hands flying in well-rehearsed choreography. But the truth, what seldom gets noticed, is the meticulous labor of holding everything together in the background. I trailed through dim corridors, refilling IVs, checking ventilators, and smoothing blankets over sleeping patients. Everything I did went almost entirely unseen, and that suited me just fine. I had long ago learned that being invisible to others meant I could be fully present for them. My home life mirrored my professional invisibility. Karina, my wife, thrived in the golden spotlight of brunch parties and networking mixers, her laughter glinting across lacquered tabletops as she floated from friend to acquaintance. She looked radiant in pastel dresses, her hair perfectly arranged, yet she never seemed to notice the laundry piling in our bedroom or the dinner plates cold on the counter. I paid the bills. I folded the shirts she never touched. I cooked simple meals, stirred soups and grilled cheese on weekdays, picked up her dry cleaning, and folded her scarves with methodical care. I did all of that without complaint because I believed love was service, was sacrifice. That October morning began like so many others. I pulled off my shoes in the tiny locker room at Cambridge General, the tile floor cold beneath my feet. I scrubbed out of my life for the past 12 hours, hands wrinkled from constant washdowns, muscles still humming with adrenaline. My legs ached in a familiar way, as though protesting the ceaseless rounds I'd run that night. I tossed my scrub top into the hamper, the memory of too many midnight trauma codes still flashing behind my eyelids. I glanced at myself in the mirror. Dark circles framed my eyes, and a few stubborn lines creased my forehead. But I offered myself a small, grateful smile. I had done well. Nobody went untreated on my watch. Nobody was left alone through a crisis. I straightened my posture, tapped the mirror gently with knuckles chafed by hours of glove use, and promised myself I'd rest, catch up on sleep, maybe even watch the sunrise from my own bed instead of the hospital's rooftop garden. I knew it was folly. Anyone who works double shifts for months on end learns that sleep has a way of evaporating, teasing you with the promise of rest before retreating into the realm of some other time. But hope is a powerful thing, and I clung to it as I walked out into the cool air, lungs filling with the smell of rain on pavement. I unlocked my car, a battered sedan that deserved retirement but still ran well, and crawled into the driver's seat, head heavy against the headrest. The drive home was a familiar blur of streetlights and silent radio tunes. I passed neon signs advertising late-night diners. I imagined a stack of pancakes dripping with syrup, the countertop warm beneath my arms, but my body felt too sluggish to stop. Instead, I watched the city's quiet pulse, a homeless man under a bridge, the glow of a 24-hour pharmacy, the rhythmic arc of buses driving their routes through empty avenues. When I finally unlocked the front door of our apartment, it stood dark and silent. A monument to absence. Karina's world belonged to daylight socializing, and by the time I returned, she had already slipped into bed or perhaps slipped away entirely to some weekend getaway. The plastic container on the kitchen counter held last night's leftovers, now congealed and cold, but I left it there. I had learned not to expect more. Climbing the narrow flight of stairs, I shed my coat, folded it over the banister, and walked into the bedroom. My side of the bed was unmade, pillow creased from my rushed exit that morning. I crawled beneath the duvet, closed my eyes, and told myself sleep would come, that my body would finally surrender to rest, that tomorrow might begin differently. The room was so still that I heard my heartbeat echo in my ears. For a moment, I allowed myself to drift, picturing soft morning light through the curtains, a cup of coffee waiting on the nightstand. A world in which Karina might see me not only as a fixture, but as the person who kept her steady when life threatened to tip her off balance. Instead, there was only darkness, thick and complete, pressing against my eyelids as I slipped into the threshold between consciousness and nothingness. And in that moment, I didn't know that the next time I would close my eyes, I would awaken in a strange, humming room, uncertain if I ever would open them again. I didn't know that my life would fracture into before and after, with no promise that I would survive the transition. But in the quiet of that bedroom, with Boston asleep around me, I believed, even as hope faded, that rest and safety still existed. And that was the last lie of my old life. The world bent in a flash of metal and agony, an SUV barreling toward me in a rush of screeching tires and blinding headlights. One moment, I was navigating the cracked pavement toward home, every thought on the hot shower and a few hours of sleep. The next, gravity flipped me headlong into chaos. My body slammed against the asphalt, the impact wrenching every bone with a crack that echoed louder than the city around me. Then everything went black, swallowed by a void that smelled of burning rubber and fear. I came to gasping for air in a place that felt both alien and eerily familiar. White walls curved above me like a tunnel, machines hissed and beeped in a frantic chorus, and tubes snaked around my arms and chest. Light slices cut across my vision as I strained to open my eyes. Faces swam into view, urgent, haunted faces framed by surgical masks and bright caps. My own world, the one I controlled in the hushed rhythm of the night shift, had imploded. I lay helpless under the hands of people I had once guided through midnight crises. Now, I was their patient, fragile, and uncertain. I tried to speak, but my voice was trapped behind broken ribs pressing against my lungs. Each inhale felt like shards grinding deeper into my side. A nurse brushed sweat from my brow and murmured, "He's back with us." Recognition swerved through my foggy mind. This was Cambridge General's ICU, the place where I had seen life threshold after threshold, guiding others through dark passages. Now I was the one hovering on the edge. Dr. Rowan, a colleague whose dry wit had often cut through the tension of a trauma code, stood at the foot of my bed. His eyes, usually sharp and teasing, were softened by something that felt like dread. "Marcus," he whispered, voice trembling under the respirator's hum. "You were hit by a speeding SUV. We fought to keep you alive. Honestly, I'm not sure you'd make it through the night." The words landed like a gut punch. All those nights I had handed out hope with measured calm, and now the man I had shared coffee breaks and weary smiles with doubted my chance to survive. Somehow, amidst the haze of painkillers and shock, I understood what was happening. My body was a battlefield. Fractured spine, 3 cracked ribs stabbing at my heart, a collapsed lung fighting to expand. And yet what stung most was a deeper fracture, one born of betrayal and absence. The staff had called Karina, my wife of 5 years. They told her I was critical, that every breath might be my last. As if she had rehearsed her response perfectly, her voice drifted through the intercom, cool and detached. "I can't come. My niece is walking her dog." Those 6 words carved a new kind of wound, one the scans couldn't capture. Dr. Rowan's jaw tightened. He stowed away the phone as though it scorched his hand. The room spun when he turned back to me, eyes glistening. Blood had seeped into my sheets, but the wound that ached most was her absence. No frantic footsteps down sterile corridors, no frantic kiss on my forehead, no roar of concern filling the ventilator's hiss. Only the steady drip of 4 fluids and the soft shuffle of nurses making rounds. Night bloomed around me, and the corridor lights dimmed to a muted glow. Nurse Tessa, a familiar silhouette against the sanitized backdrop, pulled a chair close, perched on its edge, and cradled my hand. Her voice trembled when she said, "You're not alone, Marcus. We'll stay." In that moment, I saw the full portrait of my life laid bare. A wife who weighed convenience against crisis, colleagues who elevated me only until I was wounded, and strangers whose compassion overflowed far beyond any obligation. Everything I believed about loyalty and love cracked open. As the machines carried me through the dark hours, I realized that survival depended not only on surgeons and medications, but on the truth I could no longer ignore. The person I thought would fight hardest for me was nowhere to be found. And in the raw hush of that ICU, I understood that the very silence of her absence would echo long after every 4 bag emptied. Her choice had been made. Now, it was time to decide mine. The first night in the ICU was a crucible of pain and loneliness. Every breath felt like inhaling shards, a jagged negotiation between my fractured ribs and raw lung tissue. I lay strapped to monitors, sea of white sheets and steel rails hiding every inch of skin except the 4 ports stitching me to life. My eyelids fluttered against exhaustion and agony, each flicker revealing the same sterile ceiling above me. There were no visitors, just the diligent shuffle of nurses and the low hum of machines. I listened for Karina's footsteps, the soft click of her heels on linoleum, but the corridor remained silent. Between spasms of pain, my mind drifted into memories of better nights, the warmth of our bed, the thin light of dawn painting Karina's hair golden, her whispered, "I'm here," as she settled beside me. Now, alone in this antiseptic cell, I realized how deeply I had woven my identity into her presence. Without her there, I felt unmoored, as though my soul lay somewhere beyond the reach of my injured body. Yet around me, a different form of loyalty pulsed through every action of the night staff. Nurse Tessa was my constant through the darkness. She moved with the precision of a dancer, pillows fluffed and suction catheters poised like instruments in an orchestra. When my airway threatened to clog with fluid, she would lean close, her voice soft and steady, guiding me through each cough until my chest stilled. I had never known such tender care outside of my own shifts, where I brushed away tears from widows and stroked the hair of delirious patients. Now she offered the same to me, and the gesture stirred something fierce in my chest, gratitude laced with shame. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each blink an explosion of crystalline light. Sometimes I saw fleeting shapes beyond the curtain's edge, an orderly slipping past with linens, a doctor pausing to check my chart. Always strangers. Some faces I recognized, the intern who once nervously asked for my advice on catheter insertion, the respiratory therapist who borrowed my stethoscope. They spoke in hushed tones, recounting my vital signs, debating interventions as if I were a case study, yet their eyes held empathy that Karina's had never shown. Pain medication would sweep in, a brief reprieve that unspooled the tension in my limbs. I would close my eyes and hold onto the phantom warmth of home, imagining the glow of lamps in our living room, Karina's laughter drifting from the kitchen where pancakes sizzled. But each time the meds wore off, reality rushed back in, a tide of discomfort intensified by betrayal. I understood that their kindness filled the void left by the one person who should have been here first. At one point, I realized my phone was gone, smashed in the wreckage. My emergency contacts were all stored there. I had no means to summon the few relatives who might have dropped everything. A flood of panic rose in my throat until Tessa pressed a cool hand to my forehead. "We're going to contact someone," she promised, and I clung to her certainty as desperately as I might have clung to Karina's arms. But when my chart was updated, the only person listed was her. With no alternate, the hospital could only do so much. Hour by hour, the night deepened. I counted each time a chair scraped against linoleum. 9 in the first hour, 7 in the second. I counted the beeps of the heart monitor, occasionally irregular, but steady under the staff's vigilant care. I counted moments of lucidity, the sharp pain that returned in waves, the cool, damp cloth to my brow, the whisper of encouragement in my ear. All these fragments of passage wove together into a tapestry of survival, stitched by strangers who understood that presence mattered more than words. As dawn threatened behind the blinds, I lay exhausted but alive, my body battered and my spirit bruised. I realized then that family could be found in the hands that held mine, the voices that soothed my panic, the faces that bent toward me when the world had turned away. In the flicker of early morning, I vowed that if I lived, I would never again let someone's absence define my worth. I would let the kindness of those who stayed become my foundation, rather than the silence of the one who did not. And although my wife's betrayal cut deeper than any steel, her abandonment had revealed a greater truth. I would not simply survive. I would claim a life built on genuine presence and unbreakable loyalty. Daylight seeped through the blinds, sketching pale lines across my bed. Dr. Rowan hovered at my side, phone pressed against his ear. His brow furrowed, lips compressed. I could almost hear his internal struggle through the muted hum of the monitor. He was calling Karina again. Because despite the code of care that bound them, these were her decisions to make. My chest tightened as I listened to the exchange I knew would come. "Karina," he began, voice calm but edged with urgency, "his vitals are unstable. He might not survive the next 12 hours. I felt the words land like stones inside my skull. 12 hours, an arbitrary measure of time, yet it carried the weight of my life. I strained to see Rowan's face, to glean whether he believed in my chances. Her reply drifted through the thin barrier of my consciousness. "Let me know if things get worse. We're driving to Vermont for a wellness retreat." 16 words spoken as casually as ordering coffee. 12 hours of uncertainty, my fate hanging in the balance, and her only response was an inconvenience to her itinerary. Rowan's hand trembled as he hung up. He stared at the phone as though it had betrayed him. The void left by her absence spread inside me, a cold fracture that ran deeper than any bone. I understood then that love isn't measured in syllables, it's measured in presence. And Karina had chosen comfort over crisis, serenity over solidarity. In that moment, I stopped missing her. Instead, I mourned the version of her I had believed in, the supportive partner who had somehow ceased to exist. Rowan set the phone aside and turned to me with an apologetic tilt of his head. "I'm sorry, Marcus." His voice cracked, and I realized he was grieving for me too, the man he thought he knew. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that betrayal was not a professional misstep, but a personal revelation. Yet the words caught in my throat, tangled with sweat and pain. A nurse adjusted my morphine drip, bright eyes reflecting concern. She exchanged a glance with Tessa, who hovered nearby. Their unspoken question was clear. What kind of person abandons someone on the brink of death? They didn't ask for permission to judge. They let their compassion fill the space Karina's indifference had vacated. I lay silent, absorbing each breath, each beep of the monitor. For the first time, I measured my worth not by unseen acts of service, but by the solidarity shown in my darkest hour. Presence became my lifeline, the presence of caregivers who didn't mind the hours or the mess, who didn't ask why he deserved kindness, only that he needed it. In the absence of my wife, they became my family. My mind sharpened around a decision. I would survive this night, not for Karina, but for those who believed in me. I owed them my fight. The doctor's prognosis hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, yet with every labored inhale I reclaimed a fraction of hope. Rowan adjusted my foreline, Tessa wiped sweat from my forehead, and the respiratory therapist cleaned my airway. Their movements were a silent promise. You matter. When night cloaked the ICU again, I realized I no longer needed to count the hours until dawn. I counted the hands that held mine, the voices that reassured me, the shared commitment to keep me alive. In their dedication, I discovered a new measure of love, one built on action rather than words. As I drifted into a medicated sleep, Rowan whispered, "Rest now. We've got you." Those 6 words, offered with sincerity and urgency, were more powerful than any apology Karina could have uttered. I let the darkness come, cradled by a certainty I hadn't known before. When I woke, I would choose the presence that nurtured me over the absence that abandoned me. The world narrowed to a pattern of beeps and shifting shadows. I lay in a haze of pain, unable to speak or move, yet acutely aware of every subtle change in the room. The ceiling lights flickered as the night staff flowed around me. Faces masked but eyes intent, hands skilled and sure. In the darkness between consciousness and sleep, I questioned everything I thought I knew about dependability, about love, about where I belonged in the lives of those I had served for so long. I tried to twist my head, to find something familiar beyond the curtain's fringe, but my spine complained in sharp protest. Instead, I watched as Nurse Tessa squared her shoulders and leaned close, her voice low and steady. "Marcus," she said, "we've got your back." She reached for my hand, covered it with hers, and squeezed. It was a small gesture, but it anchored me. I realized then that gratitude could burn hotter than resentment, that I needed these strangers more than I ever needed an apology from the person who had vanished from my life. In the hours that followed, I noticed the rhythms of care. At precisely 15 past the hour, a resident arrived to chart my vitals. At 20 past, the respiratory therapist performed a suction, clearing my airway so I could breathe without gasping. At 45 past, a technician slipped in to check the drainage tube, murmuring reassurance as she wiped my brow. These punctuated moments of attention built a fragile tapestry of survival, each thread woven by someone who refused to let me fade away. Bound by tubes, I found focus in counting. I tallied every chair creak when someone settled in, every soft footstep on linoleum, every time Tessa whispered my name before administering meds. 127 chair scrapes since midnight. 92 bed adjustments. 35 murmured promises that I would pull through. In cataloging their devotion, I began to reclaim a measure of control over my body and mind, refusing to succumb entirely to helplessness. My phone lay shattered in the wreckage, and the hospital's policy limited outreach to the single emergency contact listed Karina. With no alternate, the staff could only watch and wait for her call. Yet here, in this sterile sanctuary, her absence felt less like abandonment than permission, permission to lean fully into the care offered by others, to rebuild my sense of belonging among those who truly valued me. I drifted between fitful sleep and searing pain, each awakening a rude reminder that survival demanded fight. But I found renewed resolve in small victories. The moment my lungs held enough air to let me whisper a hoarse "thank you" to Tessa, the instant I squeezed her hand in return, the second I lifted my gaze to meet Dr. Rowan's encouraging nod. They celebrated these milestones quietly, as if honoring sacred rites. Their conviction lit a stubborn spark inside me, igniting a will to endure. As dawn threatened the horizon, I heard the distant clatter of trays and the murmur of day shift staff arriving. A fresh face paused at my bed, an intern who had once been nervous in my presence, now competent and purposeful. She checked my chart, adjusted an electrode, and offered me a tentative smile. In that simple gesture, I saw the cycle of care continuing. I had been their mentor, now I was their charge. It occurred to me that vulnerability could be a gift, humbling and humanizing, bridging the gap between authority and affection. When morning light filtered through the blinds, I lay still and let it wash over me. In its glow, I recognized the truth. Everyone who stayed through the night had chosen me over every other task. None of them owed me allegiance, but they gave it freely. Their devotion was not transactional. It was born of compassion. I realized that real connection didn't hinge on years of marriage or shared history, but on presence in moments of crisis. My body felt battered, but my heart beat with renewed purpose. I resolved that when I walked out of this room, I would carry forward the lessons learned here. I would cherish those who stood by me, Tessa, Dr. Rowan, that intern, and every unseen pair of hands that tended me. And I would never again allow my worth to be defined by silence or absence. As the day shift team took over, I closed my eyes, comforted by the soft murmur of voices and the steady rhythm of care. In that sanctuary of deliberate attention, I discovered an unexpected truth. Sometimes, survival depends not on the closest ties, but on the kindness of strangers who choose to stay. And that kindness would guide me through the long journey of healing ahead. A week into my confinement, the world had become a landscape of pain and faded hope. Each day dawned the same way, fluids dripping, monitors blinking, the muted sound of distant footsteps echoing through the ward. I'd been waiting for signs of progress, but for days, my body lay inert under sterile sheets. Then, as the sun dipped low one evening, and the sky outside the window turned bruised with twilight, I felt it, a gentle tremor in my fingertips. It began in my left hand, a soft flutter as though a bird were landing on a windowsill. I dared not believe it at first. My mind feared the cruel trick of dreaming until I willed the movement again. My fingers twitched, and the tremor became deliberate. Tessa was at my side in an instant, her eyes bright with astonishment and relief. She caught the twitching digits and pressed my hand gently. "You're doing it," she whispered, voice cracking with emotion. I felt tears sting behind my lids. Communication had been impossible for days, my world reduced to moans and blinking lights. Now, through that small miracle, I tasted freedom. But freedom required effort. Pain shot through my arm as I tried to bend my fingers further. I gritted my teeth, determined to push past the agony. This was my moment to reclaim myself. When I had enough strength, I rasped for paper and pen, tools I hadn't touched since my accident. The nurse fetched them with urgency, her hand steady despite the gravity of each second. My hand shook, wrist and arm weak, but I pressed the pen to paper. 2 words emerged: "Call Ivan." My breath hitched as I looked down at the scrawled letters, crude, uneven, but unmistakable. Ivan. My best friend, the brother I'd chosen, the one who never accepted the excuses that Karina had woven into our marriage. Even as I wrote, gratitude and dread warred inside me. Gratitude that I could reach out, dread of the upheaval his arrival would bring. Tessa dialed Ivan on speakerphone, holding the receiver close enough for me to hear. His voice crashed through the phone, frantic and incredulous. "Marcus? Where are you?" We listened as she explained. She told him about the accident, the near misses, the nights I hovered close to death. Then she said, "He's asking for you." Ivan didn't hesitate. He dropped everything in Seattle, his life in motion paused, and boarded the next flight east. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of each hour until he arrived. Late that night, Ivan stormed into my room like a whirlwind, arms flung wide. He looked furious, hurt, and terrified all at once. "What the hell happened to you?" he demanded, voice thick. He paced the perimeter of the bed, eyes flicking to each tube and bruise. I tried to smile, but it cracked my pain-racked face. He sat beside me, took my hand, and squeezed until my knuckles whitened. "I'm here now," he said simply. "You're getting out of here, but not with her." His words settled over me like a benediction. With Ivan by my side, the rest of the ward staff orchestrated an early discharge, bending protocol because they understood the necessity of rebuilding a life rather than merely patching a body. Against the usual restrictions, I left the ICU that night, carried by a buoyant rush of resolve. As I slid from the sterile sheets and donned a borrowed sweatshirt, I paused by the bed where I had fought for every breath. There, I left a sealed envelope addressed to Karina. I imagined her finding it, in the quiet aftermath of her delayed arrival, the antiseptic smell still clinging to linen. The note would say everything I had been unable to speak, that her absence had revealed truths I could no longer ignore. Then I stepped into the car waiting outside, pain and hope mingling in my chest, and for the first time in days, felt the thrill of being fully alive again. That night felt like standing on the edge of two worlds, one a somber ward where machines hummed their relentless vigil, the other a fragile future waiting to be claimed. I lay propped against crisp hospital pillows, every movement a negotiating of bone and muscle, bathed in the harsh glow of fluorescent lighting. My body still trembled from the ordeal, ribs aching with each breath, but my spirit pulsed with something fierce, resolve. Tonight, I would leave this place on my own terms. Ivan stood at my side, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms strong from years of manual labor in city streets. He had orchestrated a private recovery suite just down the hall, quiet, furnished with soft chairs, a small kitchenette, and a window that overlooked the hospital's courtyard. He had hired a trauma nurse to ensure I wouldn't be alone again. As I gathered strength to sit up, he offered a steadying hand, his eyes bright with determination. "Ready?" he asked quietly, and I nodded. Packing my few belongings had felt surreal. I'd left my phone in a drawer, wiped and reset by hospital policy, one of the few connection points to my old life. Now, I cradled the envelope addressed to Karina, plain white, her name scripted in my neat hand. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, folded evenly, a letter that bore the weight of all I'd come to know in these days of fractured consciousness. I refused to revisit its contents until she read it for herself. Dr. Rowan and Nurse Tessa stood nearby, expressions a mixture of pride and concern. They had argued with administrators on my behalf, citing the extraordinary circumstances. My departure, they insisted, would be the first step toward true healing, physical and emotional. Rowan placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You have the strength now. Use it wisely." Tessa dabbed at my forehead with a cool cloth. "We'll check on you tomorrow," she promised. Their presence was a salve, proof that some bonds transcend protocol and patient charts. As the curtains parted and I slid from the hospital bed into the wheelchair, pain seared through my side. Each breath sliced through me, but I clenched my jaw and focused on the wheels rolling beneath my palms. The hallway stretched out in antiseptic monotony, a gauntlet I had once navigated as caregiver. Now I traversed it as the one in need. Nurses paused to offer smiles and nods. Some whispered, "Good luck," as though my life beyond these walls was a turning point they had invested in. Outside the ICU doors, Ivan intercepted us with reassuring words. He guided me past the nurses' station, where the night team, bleary-eyed and bone-tired, gave my wheelchair a final salute. Tessa squeezed my hand before handing me the envelope. "Be kind to yourself," she whispered, and I felt her meaning sink into my bones. Kindness would be my compass now, not silent sacrifice. The private suite awaited. It was a small room painted in muted earth tones, furnished with a plush recliner and a queen-sized bed. The trauma nurse, Elena, greeted me with a professional smile and a stack of fresh linens. She had been briefed on every detail of my case, the fractured spine, the ribs, the collapsed lung. She moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting pillows, reminding me to take small sips of water, coaxing me through each breath. Her calm demeanor turned the sterile apartment into a sanctuary. Ivan bustled in and out, unpacking medications, arranging protein shakes in the mini-fridge, and double-checking the suite's emergency protocols. He found time to flip on a small lamp and open the blinds, letting moonlight spill in across the floor. I watched the city lights flicker in the distance, the Charles River reflecting a ribbon of stars. It was a view I had never paused to admire, too often rushing between home and work. Now, each light felt like a promise. Alone for a moment, I picked up the envelope and ran a fingertip along its edge. My heart drummed a staccato rhythm. Karina would receive it soon, either here or at our old apartment once hospital staff released my cart of belongings. I thought about her stride when she finally crossed the threshold, confident, her heels clicking, hair untamed by sterile air. I imagined her noticing the note first, Then the absence of me in that bed where, weeks ago, I had teetered between life and death. I slid onto the recliner, limbs protesting the shift, and breathed through the pain. Elena checked my vital signs and smiled. "You're stable," she said. "Take tonight to rest." I nodded, but rest felt like a luxury earned only by those who dared to sleep through crisis. Tonight, my mind wouldn't quiet until I released everything on a paper, words that would free me more than any discharge form. With Elena busy checking an alarm panel, Ivan stepped into the adjoining kitchenette and returned with a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth soothing my throat. He handed it to me and waited. I took a slow sip, grateful for caffeine's absence. Tea was more suitable for confession. I closed my eyes as the liquid spread warmth through my chest. Ivan knelt beside the chair, leaning in. "Whenever you're ready," he prompted. I unfolded the letter and read it in the hush of the suite. To Karina. Thank you for your absence. Your choice to remain distant taught me more about love than all the years we spent together. Love isn't a promise made when life is easy, it's a hand pressed firmly in mine when everything else crumbles. Your flight to Vermont marked the end of a chapter one no longer wished to revisit. I am filing for divorce and reclaiming my life. I want you to know that I survived not because of your love, but because of the compassion shown by strangers who became my family. I choose to build my future with those who value my presence. Goodbye, Marcus. My eyes stung. I folded the note, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it across to Ivan. He nodded, his face unreadable for a moment, then folded me into a brief, tight hug. "It's done," he said. "Now rest." That night, I lay in the new bed, cocooned in soft linens, listening to the regular breathing of a body that once rasped with pain. Outside, the city drummed its endless soundtrack, distant sirens, engines idling, a lone horn across the river. But here, in this suite, I found silence, gentle and pure. I closed my eyes, allowing hope to settle like dust motes in a slanted beam of moonlight. For the first time since the accident, I felt the quiet shift from absence to possibility. The note in the ICU bed had closed a door on a life built on unnoticed sacrifices. Now, this room held the promise of renewal, one where my needs would not be footnotes, but headlines. Tomorrow would bring therapy sessions, follow-up scans, and perhaps a call from Karina or her lawyer. But tonight, I would let sleep claim me without apology, cradled by the knowledge that I had taken myself back. I read the court papers twice before I believed they were real. A marriage certificate stamped, dissolved, my signature beneath the judge's decree, and Karina's name printed with a slash between her first and last. Karina, my wife of 5 years, had become a name in a file, plucked from the life that had once felt seamless. The apartment that had echoed with her laughter now stood silent, the walls empty of her perfume and the ghostly hum of her music. In its place was an unfamiliar stillness, one that pressed in on me and demanded I fill it with something new. I arrived at our old place in the late afternoon, the sky brushed with bruised lavender and salmon as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Ivan drove. I sat silent in the passenger seat, cradling my crutches and clutching a duffel bag packed with the belongings I wanted to keep, my favorite notebooks, a navy blue cardigan Karina had never worn, and a battered photo album filled with pictures of happier days. No matter how many times I closed that album, I could still feel the weight of her absence on each page. The lobby smelled of industrial cleaner, the elevator hummed upward, and I felt every scrape of the gears beneath our feet. When the doors parted, I paused in the hallway, taking in the familiar layout, the living room where she perched on the sofa, phone in hand, while I cooked dinners she seldom joined. The bedroom closet where I stored my scrubs alongside her tailored jackets I'd once laundered, the bathroom mirror fogged by her hot showers, water pooling on the tile. In that moment, the apartment felt like a shrine to a life I'd outgrown. I moved through each room, cataloging the emptiness. Drawers half filled with socks and underwear. She'd taken her own belongings already, I supposed, swept them away like evidence. I opened the linen closet and stacked fresh towels on a shelf, leaving the embroidered set she'd bought on our honeymoon somewhere between excitement and obligation. I lingered in the kitchen, staring at the chipped coffee mug she always used, its chipped rim a reminder that nothing perfect lasts. Then I brushed a hand over the stainless steel counter and turned to Ivan. "Just the essentials," I said, voice low but steady. "Everything else can stay." He nodded and helped me heft the duffel bag. My limbs protested, each movement a reminder of how far I'd come and how far I had yet to go. Yet beneath that ache was a current of exhilaration. I was shedding more than possessions. I was shedding the weight of expectations, of sacrifice unreturned, of love measured in absence. By the time we reached my new apartment, a modest studio near the river, dusk had fallen. The glow of street lamps painted the walls golden, and I felt the first real spark of welcome. Ivan unlocked the door, and I wheeled myself in, the hardwood floor creaking beneath my wheels. The place was unfurnished, save for a basic bedstead and a small table. Blank canvases awaited my touch. I unpacked slowly, placing my notebooks on the table, stacking the towels in a closet, and lining up the mugs on a makeshift shelf. My body ached as I crawled onto the bed, but my mind churned with possibility. There was no ghost of Karina in these rooms, no note she'd left behind or casual excuse that tethered me to frustration. Instead, there was space, empty, yes, but brimming with potential. I pressed my fingers to the smooth wall and closed my eyes. I could paint these walls any color I wanted. I could hang photographs of real friends, of family who showed up when my life collapsed. I could choose every element of this space, and in doing so, choose every element of my life. My first night alone in the new apartment was one of restless dreams and half-formed fears. I tossed between memories of Karina's last text, "I hope you find peace," and visions of my fracture lines knitting themselves back together, of muscles strengthening each day. When sleep finally claimed me, it came not as a silent oblivion, but as a gentle promise that tomorrow would begin anew. The following morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Ivan poked his head in, coffee in hand and a broad grin on his face. "I brought breakfast," he announced. "Plus, I've got Tessa coming by at noon to check your incision." I sat up, gingerly swinging my legs over the side of the bed, and smiled. "Sounds perfect." We sat at the little table, leaning in beneath the small lamp, eating scrambled eggs and toast. I told him quietly about the papers I'd filed and how it felt to see Karina's name struck from my identity. He nodded sagely, tapping his fingers on the table. "You took control," he said. "That's the hardest part." When Tessa arrived later, fresh coffee in one hand and a chart in the other, her eyes softened at the change in me. She checked my wound, praised the calluses forming on my crutches handles, and listened patiently as I detailed my rehab exercises. "You're doing great," she assured me. "But remember, healing isn't just physical. It's mental, too." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. That afternoon, I sat on the small balcony overlooking the Charles River, damp air carrying the scent of early autumn leaves. I opened my notebook, its pages blank and eager, and began to write not a story of loss, but a manifesto of purpose. I wrote about gratitude for those who stayed, about learning to ask for help without shame, about building a life where I could both give and receive care. Each word lifted a weight from my chest, turning silence into declaration. As weeks passed, my body grew stronger. Physical therapy sessions replaced hospital visits. With each session, I reclaimed a bit more mobility, standing without crutches, walking with a determined limp, then jogging across the courtyard. My confidence grew with every stride. In one session, as I balanced on a wobble board, the therapist remarked, "You're not the same man who came in here." I looked at my reflection in the mirrored wall, eyes brighter, shoulders squared, and realized it was true. My social circle, once defined by Karina's networks, expanded organically. I shared lunches with Ivan on weekends, sometimes joined by his wife and kids. I laughed at inside jokes I'd missed. Tessa and I met for coffee after work, where I listened to her dreams of traveling to her home country. I attended a community writing group and discovered the thrill of sharing my voice in a room of eager strangers. Each connection deepened my sense of belonging. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain envelope. I recognized Karina's handwriting. My heart twinged as I slid it open, half expecting flimsy apologies or demands for reconciliation. Instead, the letter contained a single sentence: "I'm sorry for not being the person you needed." No excuses, no entreaties, just a quiet acknowledgement. I read it twice, folded it gently, and placed it next to my notebooks. That evening, I sat on the balcony again, the river below shimmering under street lamps. I traced the tear in that envelope and thought of epiphanies. Love requires more than presence. It demands vulnerability, sacrifice, and genuine commitment. I poured a glass of wine and raised it to the night sky. To growth. To gratitude. To the people who stayed. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool air, letting go of the last vestiges of regret. The apartment felt alive now, humming with memories I'd made here. Notes of early morning sun, the rustle of pages as I wrote, laughter echoing through the halls. This space, once empty and uncertain, had become my sanctuary. In the months that followed, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I painted the walls in soothing grays and a single accent of deep teal, a color that reminded me of strength. I displayed photographs of Ivan's family, of my father's hearty grin, and of Nurse Tessa's warm smile. I planted succulents on the windowsill, tiny green reminders of resilience. And every time I passed the empty frame where Karina's photo once hung, I smiled. Because I was no longer the silent one. I had found my voice in the care of strangers, the loyalty of friends, and the love I learned to give myself. My marriage lay in ashes, but from those ashes rose something stronger, a life built on presence, compassion, and unwavering self-respect. When I took that first unsteady step out of the private recovery suite, it felt as though I had crawled out of a cocoon into a world I had long forgotten. The morning air was crisp with September's promise, and the courtyard beyond the sliding glass doors glowed with the soft light of dawn, leaves stirring gold and amber under a gentle breeze. I had spent so many nights tethered to machines that even the breeze felt foreign, yet now it brushed my cheeks like an old friend's greeting. Ivan hovered close, his arm a sturdy brace around my shoulders. Each step was a negotiation between my fractured bones and a newfound determination. Pain throbbed along my ribs, a stubborn reminder of how easily life could fracture, yet beneath it pulsed an exhilaration I hadn't felt in years. We wound our way through the quiet halls, past nurses' stations flickering with charts and computers, past colleagues who had once seen me only as background support. Today, they paused to smile and nod, genuine warmth in their eyes. Some offered thumbs up, others clapped softly against their chests, a silent applause for a life reclaimed. My heart squeezed at their gestures. This was what real love looked like, I realized. Not grand declarations, but steadfast presence when it mattered most. Behind every congratulatory glance lay memory of nights I had stood by others, offering encouragement in moments of crisis. Now, they were standing by me. Out on the sidewalk, the hospital's brick facade warmed under the sun, and I felt a surge of possibility. We crossed the street toward the river path, the Charles River winding its steady course beside us. Water sparkled where light caught ripples, and I imagined every ripple as a heartbeat, a testament that life carried on, unstoppable and resilient. We found a park bench overlooking the water, and Ivan settled me down gently. He sat close, our shoulders brushing, and handed me a bottle of water. I turned it over in my hands, marveling at the ordinary comfort. It was ordinary, yes, but miraculous after weeks of sterile plastic cups and hospital-grade hydration. I can't believe how far you've come, Ivan said, voice rich with pride. He studied my face, as if mapping each bruise and scar, then meeting my eyes with an intensity that felt like absolution. You're walking. You're alive. I smiled, but the smile trembled with emotion. I stole a march on death, I replied, voice husky. The words tasted like confession and victory intertwined. I had always believed that strength lay in endurance, how long you could shoulder life's burdens without complaint. Now, I recognized that true strength was admitting vulnerability, allowing others to shoulder those burdens alongside you. We lingered in silence, watching joggers circle the path, cyclists wheeling past, dogs tugging their owners on bright woven leashes. Each passerby lived a story I could only imagine. People chasing deadlines, meeting friends, worrying over dinner plans. For too long, I had moved through life as a peripheral figure, existing for others' comfort but neglecting my own. Now, every ordinary scene felt profound. I realized that living fully meant embracing both the mundane and the magnificent, the squeak of my sneakers on pavement, the breeze teasing my hair, the laughter of children darting along the water's edge. When we returned to the suite, Tessa was waiting in the doorway. She had swapped her nurse's uniform for jeans and a hoodie, an unspoken invitation to a less clinical encounter. Her eyes brightened when she saw me, and she hurried forward. "Look at you," she exclaimed, hands on her hips. "Standing up on your own. Care to walk a few laps inside?" I nodded and rose, crutches tucked under my arms. Each step rang with cautious confidence. She matched my pace, offering her shoulder when my leg faltered, encouraging me with every word. "You're stronger than you know, Marcus," she said. "Don't forget to slow down when you need to." That afternoon, my father arrived from Arizona, suitcase in hand and cinnamon tea steaming in a to-go cup. He looked thinner than I remembered, hair streaked with silver, but his smile was as broad as the desert skies. He set down the tea and embraced me, chest against mine, and I smelled the familiar scent of his aftershave, oak moss and something earthy that felt like home. He stepped back and studied me with a critical eye softened by relief. "So this is what you look like after nearly dying," he teased, but his voice cracked at the end. "I thought I lost you." I laughed then, a sound that felt foreign and joyful. I told him about Ivan's whirlwind arrival, about Tessa's midnight vigil and Dr. Rowan's unwavering gaze. As I spoke, my father's eyes shone, and he reached out to ruffle my hair like he did when I was a boy. In that gesture was a forgiveness I had never sought but gratefully accepted. He handed me the tea. "Drink up. You've earned it." The tea's warmth spread through me, carrying memories of childhood Sunday mornings, pancakes, soft laughter, the rustle of newspapers. For the first time in ages, I felt like the boy he used to tuck in at night, safe and cherished. That evening, the four of us, me, Ivan, Tessa, and Dad, gathered around the small dining table in the suite's kitchenette. Elena, my trauma nurse, prepared a simple stew on the portable hot plate she'd set up. The aroma of vegetables mingled with the hospital's antiseptic tang, creating a blend strangely comforting. We passed bowls around, spoons clinking against porcelain, and for a moment, I forgot the world outside. We traded stories. Dad recounted a fishing trip gone awry. Ivan boasted of an in-law's cooking disaster, and Tessa shyly admitted her fear of deep-water swimming. I laughed at their anecdotes, and the sound felt healing proof that laughter, like breath, could mend fractures. Late into the night, after the dishes were washed and Ivan had returned to his rented room, Tessa and I sat side by side on the love seat. The city lights shone through the window, and the river's distant hum provided a gentle lullaby. She looked at me with appraisal, her brow soft. "You've been through hell," she said, voice low. "But you walked out of it. Not unscathed, but alive." I nodded, tracing patterns on the fabric of the couch. "I wouldn't be here without you," I whispered. Her hand covered mine, firm and reassuring. "We did it together," she corrected. In that moment, I understood exactly what real love looked like. It wasn't declarations written in cards or vows spoken beneath a canopy of flowers. It was the steady presence in darkness, the hands that held mine when I couldn't stand, the voices that whispered hope when I believed none remained. Real love was messy and unglamorous. It was crutches and cold tea, midnight tears and midday jokes, and the unspoken promise that someone would stay, even when I had nothing left to give. Over the following weeks, as my strength returned, I began to reweave my life around these truths. I walked further each day, first down the hall, then into the courtyard, and eventually along the river path again. My leg's strength grew, and the limp I once saw as a blemish became a badge of survival, a testament to the journey I had endured. I rejoined the community writing group, sharing scenes of hospital corridors and tender betrayals, and found that others listened with empathy. Each session, I felt a fragment of my old identity return, tempered by new depth and compassion. Friends and colleagues visited more frequently now, some bearing casseroles, others bringing books or a worn guitar they thought might coax a tune from my lips. Each visit added a stitch to the tapestry of my recovery, reminding me that life's richness comes from reciprocity, giving and receiving care in equal measure. I wrote thank you notes, long, heartfelt letters, to every nurse, doctor, and friend who had carried me through those dark days. With each note mailed, I felt a swell of gratitude that eclipsed any bitterness I once held toward absence and betrayal. One crisp morning, as autumn deepened and leaves skittered across sidewalks, I stood at the river's edge alone. I watched the water flow, unstoppable and serene, and placed both hands on my ribs, feeling the solid reassurance of bone and muscle. The ache of those broken ribs remained, a subtle echo of hardship, but beneath it lay a stronger pulse, the unbreakable cadence of life. I inhaled deeply, grateful for every breath. Real love, I understood then, was not a singular moment but a lifetime of moments, a tapestry woven of presence, compassion, vulnerability, and unwavering support. It showed up in the routine, shared coffee, steady companionship, open ears, and steadfast hearts. It shone brightest when life fractured, illuminating paths I could not walk alone. And as I turned from the river to head home, I realized that the person who had always been there was no longer invisible. I had opened my eyes to see them, and more importantly, I had opened my heart to let them in. 6 months had passed since I reclaimed my life from the sterile corridors of the hospital, and in that time I had learned to measure days not in pain or absence, but in moments of genuine presence and self-discovery. The studio apartment by the Charles River had become more than a space to heal. It was my sanctuary. I had painted the walls in calming shades of slate and seafoam, hung photographs of friends whose loyalty had outshone any marital vow, and filled the windowsill with succulents that thrived under my careful tending. Each morning, I awakened to the gentle arc of sunlight across the hardwood floors, a silent reminder that life continued with or without my permission. And I chose to live fully, to embrace both the warmth of morning light and the cool hush of twilight. On a late spring afternoon, I settled at my kitchen table, an old oak piece rescued from a thrift store, sanded and varnished until its grain shimmered in lamplight. My laptop sat open before me, alongside a mug of chamomile tea that steamed in dizzying spirals. The chair creaked as I shifted, checking for new emails. I'd grown accustomed to occasional messages from distant relatives or notifications about insurance claims and follow-up appointments. But when a new subject line arrived, blank except for a small envelope icon, it made my pulse flicker with a strange cocktail of curiosity and indifference. I clicked it open. No subject, no preamble. Just 4 words in the body. Can we talk? Typed exactly as though she hesitated before pressing send. For words that once would have stirred in me a whirlpool of expectation and longing. Instead, I felt the familiar quiet bloom in my chest. Peace. The email hovered on the screen, its cursor blinking like a metronome. I sat back, hands resting on the keyboard, and allowed myself a moment to honor the weight of what had transpired. 6 months of rebuilding, of learning to trust my own heartbeat more than another's promise. I stood from the table and retrieved the stack of papers tucked into my desk drawer, my discharge documents from Cambridge General, the divorce decree, appointment reminders, and the printed copy of her email. I gathered them in my arms, feeling the slight crinkle of paper against my fingertips. Outside, the late afternoon sky was turning a soft shade of rose gold, so I carried the bundle onto the balcony. The city hum softened to a distant murmur. The breeze carried the faint scent of linden blossoms and warm asphalt. I closed the door behind me, lit the burner in the tabletop fire pit, and listened to the whirl of the pilot as it ignited. The flame sputtered to life, brittle and bright, and I arranged the papers into a loose pile. Karina's 4 words lay nestled among legal judgments and medical receipts, an epitaph to a chapter that had ended on my terms. My heart thudded once in my chest, a reminder that later grief or regret could still surface if given space. But as I held the first sheet over the gentle blaze, I felt no sorrow, only resolve. The edges curled and blackened, a whisper of smoke curling upward, twisting into the copper sky. I watched as each page surrendered to flame, the discharge summary, the finality of those hospital corridors, the divorce decree, the severing of a love founded on absence, and Karina's tentative olive branch, flicking itself out in a cloud of ash. Tessa's voice drifted from the open doorway, calm as ever. "Everything all right?" she asked, stepping onto the balcony in her favorite denim jacket. She placed a hand gently on my forearm, her gaze both curious and compassionate. I nodded and offered her the simple truth I had learned. I'm exactly where I need to be. Her lips curved into a small, proud smile. "Good," she said, resting her hand over mine. "You deserve this calm." We stood together in companionable silence, watching the last embers die. Beyond us, the sky deepened to lilac and then to a scattered tapestry of stars. The river below glinted like molten silver in the early evening glow. I felt carried by the hush of the world's turning, a hush that no longer felt daunting, but welcoming. Inside, Ivan's laughter spilled out through the open balcony doors, carried on the mellow strains of Miles Davis from the stereo he insisted on playing whenever he felt life needed a soundtrack. I could see the faint glow of his silhouette against the living room wall, framed by record covers and scattered books. He had made this place a home far richer than any carefully curated decor, by infusing it with music, banter, and the easy camaraderie of chosen family. I slipped my hand from Tessa's and stepped forward, placing my palm against the cool metal railing. Beneath my feet, the apartment trembled slightly as a late-night subway train passed under the city's spine. In that moment, I felt the full weight of choice and liberation, the choice to let go of a marriage that had been unbalanced from the start, the choice to stand in my truth instead of shrinking into neglect. I inhaled deeply, tasting the mingled scents of lindenwood, distant rain, and Tessa's comforting presence. Tessa joined me at the railing, leaning close. "What's next for you?" she asked softly, not with expectation, but with the genuine curiosity of someone invested in my well-being. I exhaled slowly, letting the words form. "I want to keep writing. To keep building this." I swept my arm to take in the balcony, the room, the skyline stretching beyond. Life I've created. I owe it to everyone who stayed. Tessa nodded, and in her eyes I saw reflected the person I had become, no longer defined by absence or sacrifice, but by purpose and presence. We stayed there until the city lights burst fully into bloom, windows glowing like lanterns, traffic flowing in veins of ruby red and amber yellow. The river darkened to a silent ribbon, and a cool breeze whispered of early summer nights to come. The balcony felt sacred, a vantage point from which I could both see and choose my path forward. Karina's memory flickered only as a brief shadow against the radiance of my present. I had survived betrayal and broken bones. I had forgiven not for her, but for my own capacity to heal. At last, Tessa squeezed my shoulder and slipped back inside, leaving me alone under the lantern glow of distant windows. I closed my eyes and lifted my face toward the breeze. The city's soft chorus, the hum of distant traffic, the murmur of conversation drifting from open windows, an occasional siren's wail, felt like an affirmation. Life continues, carrying scars and triumphs alike. I reached into my pocket and drew out my phone, thumb hovering over a message draft I had saved months ago, but never sent. Instead, I set the phone back in my pocket. There was no need to reach out, no unfinished conversation to salvage. I opened my arms as though embracing the night itself, the hum of existence pulsing through the railing beneath my fingertips. Freedom, I realized, was not merely the absence of pain or obligation, but the presence of choice. I chose my own company, my own growth, and my own steady heartbeat over the echo of another silence. The evening's hush deepened into night. The stars crowded ever brighter above the river's reflective currents. And there, on the rooftop of my life reconstructed, I stood, awake, unbroken, and utterly at peace. Karina had made her choice. I had survived mine. Now, in the quiet embrace of a city that never truly sleeps, I chose myself, and in that choice, found a freedom more luminous than any sunset could ever be.